Many, Saturday's going to be dry and bright with some October sunshine, lifting the temperatures to fairly typical values for this time of year, low to mid-teens. But the winds will be a little bit lighter than they have been. So the weekend generally dry, but we are going to see a change on Sunday. It looks like with more cloud and some outbreaks of rain spreading into parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie's. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
No spin, no bias, no censorship. This is Dan Wootton tonight with me, Mark Dolan. Coming up, with Tory MPs openly talking about ousting Liz Truss. The greatest threat to our Prime Minister is not Sir Keir Starmer, but her own backbenchers. But if these jokers think leadership runner-up Rishi Sunak is a better option, we really are in trouble. That is my digest next, and I'm not pulling my punches. Reacting to my digest and all of the big stories of the day are my superstar panel, Conservative commentator Dominique Samuels, former Tory London mayoral candidate Sean Bailey, and author and broadcaster Amy Nickel. Plus, Tory grandee and one of the most successful authors of all time, with sales of 275 million around the world, Lord Jeffrey Archer gives his verdict on how the fractured party can turn their fortunes around. And he reveals all about his new thriller, starring his good friend Princess Diana. Lord Archer, live at 10:20. And after the Prime Minister's top-rate tax cuts send her plummeting in the polls to below even Jeremy Corbyn, why do we demonise the wealthy when all that matters is the poorer getting richer? Former Tory minister and political firebrand Anne Widdecombe weighs in at 9:40. Also, I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw this shocking case of harassment today.
Lies! Tory lies! Cost people's lives! Got anything to say for yourself?
Well, what's your view of that? After Lee Anderson lashes out at a protester after a week of abuse at the Tory party conference, are politicians allowed to have human reactions? I'll put that to my panel at 10 o'clock. Elsewhere on the show, as hundreds of thousands of nurses threaten a historic strike, do carers have a moral duty to keep working, or are they the ones most deserving of fair pay? We'll debate that at 10:30. Was the USA and the world in general in safer and more secure hands when Donald Trump was president? Social media sensation Zubi thinks so, and he's uncancelled at 10:45. And why is Wales's First Minister Mark Drakeford running scared of a COVID inquiry? Why is he so afraid of seeing his actions during the pandemic brought under scrutiny.
Stop misrepresenting their view, First Minister. Only today they've repeated the request for an independent inquiry here in Wales.
The world has moved on.
Positive Professor Carol Sikora takes the lockdown authoritarian to task at 9:50. And as Cabinet Minister Alok Sharma challenges Liz Truss's decision to block His Majesty King Charles from COP27, the environmental summit, should King Charles stay out of the climate debate? I'll get your verdict in The Clash at 9:25. Plus, with Sadiq Khan in the running, how on earth am I going to choose just one Union Jackass? The final Great Britain and Union Jackass of the week is at 10:50. This is Dan Wootton tonight. It's going to be a busy show. It's me, Mark Dolan, in the hot seat. Let's go. Before we start, just one thing. The halo has slipped for St. Gary. No, not Lineker, this time another football icon. Ex-Man United right-back Gary Neville, who's made a right idiot of himself. Keir Starmer's best friend, of course, a man who champions workers' rights and equality for women. How unfortunate, therefore, that he should sign a reported six-figure salary to be working with beIN Sport. Now, beIN Sport is not a shoe shop that sells Nike trainers. It's the state-owned channel of the Qatari government, a government which presides over rules in which being gay is a crime, punishable by up to 3 years in prison, and one which has something called a male guardianship system, in which women are dependent on men for permission to marry, travel, pursue higher education, and access reproductive health care. It's exactly the same eye-watering hypocrisy as we've seen from the ultra-woke Gary Lineker, who considers himself to be politically to the left, whilst battling with HMRC to reduce his tax bill. Then there's the rainbow flag-wearing David Beckham, who's received millions to be the face of the World Cup, and its hosts the wretched and medieval Qatari regime. Neville and Beckham are as bad as each other, and they demonstrated just that in a recent so-called documentary in which Gary Neville interviewed David Beckham about his new role as the face of the World Cup, without once mentioning the issue of women's rights, the treatment of gay people, or the appalling conditions in which those stadiums were built, causing multiple injuries and the loss of 5,000 lives. Neville has said that he'll continue to campaign on those issues and try and raise awareness in his new role. But the best thing he could do is boycott the World Cup and make a statement. Instead, he takes money from this despicable regime. Football is one of the most hypocritical industries out there, and the likes of Neville are its worst proponents. This is an own goal for the woke Gary Neville. This multi-millionaire socialist loves to wave the red flag. But it's time someone showed him the red card. Now, my digest is coming up. It's all about our new Prime Minister and rather pathetic Tory backbenchers. We'll get reaction from my superstar panel, political commentator Dominique Samuels, former Tory London mayoral candidate Sean Bailey, and author and broadcaster Amy Nickel. In Liz, we must trust. Find out why after the headlines with the highly trustworthy Ray Addison.
I'm Ray Addison in the GB Newsroom. Prince Harry and Elton John are among a group of people suing the publisher of the Daily Mail over what lawyers are describing as gross breaches of privacy. A warning for those watching on TV, the following footage contains flashing images. The lawsuit alleges that Associated Newspapers hired private investigators to secretly place listening devices inside people's cars and homes. It also claims private phone calls were recorded and sensitive medical and financial information obtained using impersonation and manipulation. The mother of murdered teenager Stephen Lawrence is also a claimant, along with Elizabeth Hurley and Sadie Frost. Associated Newspapers has refuted the claims, describing them as preposterous. 3-hour blackouts could be introduced across the UK this winter if the country fails to secure enough natural gas. The warning from the National Grid electricity system operator comes as Europe struggles with restricted energy supplies caused by Russia's war with Ukraine. The Liberal Democrats are calling on the government to hold an emergency Cobra meeting to address the issue. However, the Prime Minister says the UK can get through the winter.
We're working very hard on energy security. It's one of the reasons I'm here in Prague today. We have interconnectors with our European partners. We're working on more gas supplies. We're working on building out nuclear energy, building out wind energy, so we do have a secure supply of energy.
Well, earlier on, Liz Truss called on European leaders to unite, saying Russian aggression has caused the biggest crisis since the Second World War. She's urged the group to address the fundamental causes of energy and migration challenges. The Prime Minister also held a meeting with her French counterpart, describing President Emmanuel Macron as a friend and saying they'll work closely to create energy security. In a developing story in the US, an active shooting situation is unfolding in Dearborn, Michigan. Local police say shots are being fired at the Hampton Inn Hotel, with reports of one fatality. Troopers and officers are working on clearing the area. They're describing the situation as extremely dangerous and urging the public to stay away. The US president has announced plans to pardon anyone with a federal conviction for simple marijuana possession. Joe Biden says it will help people to get employment, housing and educational opportunities. He's directed the Attorney General to implement the decision. The president is also urging state governors to follow suit. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Back now to Mark Dolan.
Many thanks to our well-dressed news bulletin reader, Ray Addison. I had no idea it was St. Patrick's Day. What's the greatest threat to Liz Truss's premiership? Keir Starmer? Vladimir Putin? The international bond markets? Sneaky Nicola Sturgeon? None of the above. It's her own party. After a truly magnificent speech at Tory party conference yesterday, in which this wonderfully unpolished, clear-sighted and authentic politician who gets things done, like most women, laid out her vision for Britain. A Prime Minister with a vision, praise the Lord. And now she's on the world stage at a meeting of European leaders in Prague, planning to sort out Ukraine, the migrant crisis and the Northern Ireland Protocol. There's even talk of a massive trade deal with India and its population of 1 billion people in a matter of weeks. But all we're hearing about, following yesterday's triumph, is Conservative backbenchers, many of whom exited the cabinet following Johnson's departure, plotting her removal. The cut to 45p in the top rate of tax was a brilliant policy which could potentially have cost nothing or even brought more money in as more people moved up the pay bracket without fear of being clobbered by HMRC. That policy, that tax cut, would have attracted high flyers from around the world into the UK. Organisations like the Institute for Fiscal Studies and its head, Paul Johnson, who I do admire, was squealing about the tax cuts just a few days ago, but now admits the 45p cut was insignificant in the general scheme of things. Here's what he had to say about the top-rate tax cut U-turn. He tweeted, "A reminder that abandoning the cut to the 45p rate may be important politically, it may matter for the tone of government, it affects inequality, but it is of trivial, I repeat, trivial importance fiscally." Well, they could have mentioned that at the time, couldn't they? It certainly wasn't couched in those terms by many on budget day. But what did for the 45p tax cut wasn't the opposition, or political think tanks, or economic experts, or even currency traders. It was Tory MPs. I'm talking about the likes of that snake in the grass, Michael Gove, Parliament's answer to John Travolta, the dance floor hogging former Levelling Up secretary, going on Sunday morning telly to say the tax cuts were unconservative. On what planet are low tax cuts unconservative? The top rate cut was simply there to make the economy more competitive and grow it so we can help everyone in our society. Losing it is a blow to our economic prospects, and we will be all the poorer for it. If Conservative MPs had got behind this plan to reduce taxes for the rich and the poor, we could poach French bankers from Paris and German bankers from Frankfurt, and we'd be laughing all the way to the bank. Shame on them. Liz Truss's rumoured next step to get on top of out-of-control public spending by linking benefit rises to average earnings rather than inflation, which is how it is for working Brits, looks to be the next plank of Trussonomics to go, thanks to party divisions. What a bunch of planks these Tories are, including Cabinet Minister Penny Mordaunt, who shot this plan out of the sky, seemingly making policy up on the hoof. Meanwhile, Tory MPs will no doubt thwart fracking sites in their own constituencies, which, of course, fracking is aimed at making Britain's energy independence all the better. They'll probably thwart house building due to NIMBYism in spite of a desperate lack of homes. With these disloyal Tory backbenchers trying to end Truss's premiership before it's even started, we might as well have a Labour government. If they carry on behaving like this and refuse to get behind their impressive new leader, there will be a Labour government, and it will be their fault. Meanwhile, what's happened to the alleged crashing of the economy? Remember the panic a week ago? Well, the pound is recovered, the cost of government borrowing has fallen, and the aforementioned Institute for Fiscal Studies, as reported in The Telegraph, point out today that Brits are suffering £21 billion worth of stealth taxes, proving that those tax cuts weren't just a luxury, but a necessity. It's so hard keeping up with these experts, isn't it? 1 minute, the tax cuts are excessive. Now, taxes are too high. Which is it? Make your bleeding mind up. Liz Truss can go from zero to hero if she holds her nerve, goes for growth, and whips her party into shape. Truss's policies are an attempt to move the dial for the British economy and to get the country moving. But they will take political courage and a united party. That mini-budget was bold, brilliant and brave. But these plotters have no such stomach for the fight. They want tax and spend and to see a low-growth, high-tax economy in which Britain will be living on the never-never, forever-ever. They're cowards with no backbone, but it was ever thus. Thatcher had the same problem with the so-called Tory wets who blocked her important reforms. The weak are a long time in politics. Rishi Sunak's supporters have got to decide whether they're willing to bury the hatchet or play their part in making Keir Starmer our next Prime Minister. Talk of replacing Truss now is insanity. The British people will never forgive the Conservatives for this chaos. By plotting to install Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister by December, they are turkeys voting for Christmas. Liz Truss should tell them to get stuffed. Now, what's your view? Let me know, Dan at gbnews.uk. But let's get reaction from my superstar panel. Political commentator Dominique Samuels, former Tory London mayoral candidate Sean Bailey, and author and broadcaster Amy Nickel. Dominique, let me start with you. Do you think those plotters on the Tory backbenchers are simply going to make life easier for Labour?
Oh, I think most definitely. I think that with regards to the U-turn on the top rate of tax cut, I think that was very, very bad politically because it looks like a government that's lost its sense of direction before really it's even started to govern. Regardless of whether or not you think that this particular tax cut was needed, if a politician has conviction with regards to a policy, they should stick to that. What people want is a politician that appears as though they have a vision and acts upon that vision, rather than a politician that can be bent whenever the media decides to go on the attack. So if they want to stay full course and avoid a Labour government, they do need to get behind Liz Truss, I believe. But my personal prediction is that the next government will probably be a Labour government, regardless.
Well, I think Tory backbenchers are helping, aren't they, Sean? You must watch in despair because united parties win elections, divided parties lose them.
I think it's two ways to look at it. It's obvious that a united party win, and unlike Dominique, I don't think a Labour government is inevitable. But what will hasten that is if we make another step and do the work of the Labour Party. Many would tell you the removal of Boris Johnson was an act of self-harm. The removal of Liz would be beyond self-harm. It'd be suicidal. But here's the most important thing. Tory MPs created this situation. everybody knew, right, some of us wanted it, but everybody knew that Liz would beat Rishi in the final. If they didn't want it that way, they should put somebody else in the final to face Liz. And the other thing that somebody said to me at conference, one of the activists, he said, why didn't we have 3 people in the final so we could have a real choice and it may have been different? The point is Tory MPs made it the way it is and now they have to get behind it. Not only is that our rules, but it's the right thing to do. And if you're a Tory MP now, who's in a marginal seat, if you think this grumbling is going to keep you in that seat, it's wrong. What will keep you in that seat is a full-throated support of the PM and all of her plans.
Or defection.
Yes, and
But that wouldn't even save you. It wouldn't.
Sean Bailey, the Sunak Spartans have got to move on. Those still dreaming that Rishi Sunak will be our next Prime Minister, possibly by Christmas, have got to actually bury the hatchet now, haven't they? Because they have a plan to unseat Liz Truss, I think.
If they re-ran the leadership contest again, Rishi would lose again because everybody would hold him responsible for not only losing Boris, but now losing Liz. So that's simply not on. And some people, look, if you're now out of the in crowd, if you're not the persons they're going to put in the cabinet, you've had your go. Make sure there's something for other people to do. Other MPs, new, fresh talent.
Yes, I mean, this reminds me of the divided Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn. In fairness to Keir Starmer, he seems to have brought his party together, which is why he's more likely, Amy Nicole, to be our next Prime Minister.
Yeah, absolutely. The Labour Party are fairly united at the moment, and it's great to see. However, the only person letting down the country and letting down the Conservative Party is Liz Truss. You can't put this at anyone else's door. Liz Truss is the problem here, and I think is going to be the demise of the Conservative Party for sure. You're the only person left calling her an impressive leader. That's just absolute
She's got an amazing vision for the economy and for the country.
What's her amazing vision? Imaginary pies made of low wages and huge bills, which is all that the country's facing.
She wants to boost national income to pay for the NHS that you love so much.
Boost national income by favouring the top 5% of the country.
So that they come and live in Britain, spend their money here, invest here, and pay their taxes
but nobody
here.
else has got any money to spend in any of these businesses.
But don't you want lots of Ferrari-owning millionaires in our great cities spending their cash here?
No, I'd rather they not be here and the children not face child poverty in this country.
Who's going to pay to feed those kids?
The gap between the poorest in this country and the richest in the country is the biggest in Europe at the moment. We have a serious problem, and you can't favour
big problems. I agree with you. I agree with you. We've got big problems, but of course it's that 1% that you despise so much who pay 30% of income tax. We need those people.
We need those people.
And we should love bomb them.
We do not need those people.
We should thank them for their money.
At the expense of the people that are really needy in our society, that need our help. And I think that's why this mini-budget was so unpopular, because maybe it is fiscally trivial and irrelevant, but it's what it said. It said, we, the Conservatives, favour the rich. We don't care about you, little people.
It's the reality of the world. It's very well you send in the right message, but let me tell you something now. As somebody who comes from a poor background, sweet words don't taste nice. They simply don't. They don't buy the food you want. The bottom line was this. Was there things they could have done better in the budget? Yes.
Like what, Sean?
The key thing, they could have communicated the message better. Even the
Correct.
PM,
and they should have got the OBR to have a quick once-over.
Of course they should. And there's changes to the way that it was administered. There were certain people who were moved on and sacked. They probably should have kept so that the city got behind it and understood what was happening more.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is, here's the big question. What would Labour do? They've poked a lot of fun, they've thrown a lot of mud. Let's hear what their response is to growing our economy and feeding people in the future.
They've had excellent responses. They'd nationalise energy. They would actually look after the environment. Like, the things Liz Truss is putting forward, she wants to destroy the environment.
No, she wants to destroy the environment. And how are they going to... If their argument is that too much money's been spent, how exactly are they going to nationalise energy without spending a huge sum of money? And the key thing is this. I spoke to a young person the other day who said, we can nationalise road, we can nationalise... That's only because they weren't alive when British Rail happened and was an absolute...
They were all loss-making.
Rubbish. They're all loss-making, and what it means is we take on liabilities which we have to pay way into the future, which destroys the economy way into the future. That is not the way forward.
Plus, renewables are an experiment that haven't really paid off yet, and that is Keir Starmer's great business idea for a kind of national energy company is based on renewables, which have so far not demonstrated that they're worth the money. Germany has spent over 200 billion euros on renewables in the last 10 years, and they face an energy crisis this winter.
But what is for certain is that we need to not be dependent on fossil fuels. So that's surely a better...
In the long term, I agree, but not medium and short, I would suggest. Dominique, last word.
I think generally I'm kind of outside this whole sort of party politics thing. I do think it's...
That's why we love you.
Yeah, I do think it's a bit
You're
trivial.
normal. You're a normal person.
I think it's a bit trivial, especially, you know, I see Amy's point about the problem being Liz Truss. I don't think she's a remarkable politician, I'm afraid.
Borrowing is not conservative.
Yeah, and the market didn't...
That's true.
The market didn't react well to the budget. I think that's just a fact. Personally, I do believe that if the Conservative government don't actually get their act together, then the next government you will see is a Labour government. You can say, well, what would Labour do? But people aren't really interested in Labour's solutions. They're only interested in a government that's not the Tories.
Labour would help the 95% as opposed to the 5%.
Labour wouldn't really help much more than the Tories.
Well, there you go. I mean, what is your verdict on those warring backbenchers? What is a bigger headache for Liz Truss? Keir Starmer or the MPs behind her on the green benches? Let me know what you think about the Tory civil war. Should the Sunak Spartans bury the hatchet? Let me know your thoughts, Dan, at gbnews.uk. Coming up after the Prime Minister was forced into a top-rate tax cut U-turn. Easy for you to say. Why do we demonise the wealthy when all that matters is the poor getting richer? Former Tory minister and political firebrand Anne Widdecombe weighs in at 9:40. But first, as Cabinet Minister Alok Sharma challenges Liz Truss's decision to block His Majesty from COP27, should King Charles stay out of the climate debate? I want your thoughts on this. Email Dan at gbnews.uk or tweet us using the handle at gbnews. There's also a poll up, so you can vote in that right now. I want to hear your opinions. The Clash is next and the results of that poll. And don't forget, later in the show, one of the best-selling authors of all time, Lord Jeffrey Archer, live on the programme. See you in 2.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
You're watching Dan Wootton Tonight with me, Mark Dolan. Political firebrand Anne Widdecombe and Carol Sikora, the positive professor, on the way. Why does Wales's First Minister want to duck out of a COVID inquiry? What could he possibly be afraid of? But it's time now for The Clash. Before she U-turned on her top-rate tax cut, Liz Truss made a very important call on banning King Charles from attending the upcoming COP27 in Egypt later this month. But in yet another sign of dissent among her cabinet, COP26 president and, of course, 27, Alok Sharma broke ranks and urged Liz Truss to reconsider her ban on the king and allow him to attend, saying, I would certainly welcome the King's attendance at COP27. I know that many people around the world see him as a leader in this area. It's no secret that the new King is a vehement champion for the climate, having even attended last year's summit in Glasgow whilst he was Prince of Wales. But following his accession, the royalists among us know the monarchy's survival will depend on him following the lead of his late mother, Queen Elizabeth II, by remaining entirely neutral on social and political issues. But what do you think? Should King Charles stay out of the climate debate? Let me know your thoughts down at gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. And whilst you're there, please vote in the Twitter poll. I'll bring you the results shortly. But to debate all of that, I'm delighted to welcome entrepreneur and broadcaster Amy Ansell, human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell, and director of Climate Action and Reason 26, Lois Perry. So what do we think about this? Let me start with you, if I can, Amy Ansell. Should King Charles stay out of green politics?
He should definitely be at COP27. I think it's an absolute travesty that Liz Truss has banned him. He's a lifelong environmental campaigner, and he's more of an expert than most of the people that will be there. And for the first speech abroad for him to be there at COP27 would be incredible, considering all the recent media attention since he just became king. And I think it's absolutely ridiculous that he has been banned.
But, Amy, although he's our great king and long live the king, who cares what he thinks? After all, he's an unelected aristocrat.
But you know what? When his mother, Queen Elizabeth, spoke and gave that welcome speech at COP26, she talked about how this really wasn't a political conference. It's about the environment. We have one planet, and if it's a sick planet, we can't move to another one, can we?
However, let me put this point to Peter Tatchell, human rights campaigner. Peter, if policies to tackle so-called climate change involve higher taxes and a worse way of life, then it becomes political.
Well, of course, let me first say that I'm no great fan of the monarchy, but I would pay tribute to King Charles for more than 3 decades of speaking out on environmental issues, which do transcend party politics. This is an existential threat to the survival of humanity. It's quite right that he should be able to speak out. I don't agree with your premise that having action on climate means poverty or a reduction in living standards. There are ways around this. We can find ways to both protect the climate and protect our living standards.
Although, Peter Tatchell, the West has gone green over the last 10 years, for example, Germany rejecting nuclear fuel in 2011, and now they face a winter energy crisis. Businesses in Germany will have to close, possible 3-day week, and Germans will be shivering in their apartments and houses this winter, as will many Brits, all as a result of green policies. If we'd been fracking and drilling for oil and gas, we wouldn't be cold this winter.
Absolutely.
Peter.
No, those problems are a result of the war in Ukraine, not because of green policies. Right now, the price of gas is 9 times higher than the price of renewables. If the British government, successive British governments, both Tory and Labour, had switched to green energy decades ago, we wouldn't be in this mess. We wouldn't have these astronomical bills because renewables are now much, much cheaper.
Amy, I'm going to come to you before I get to Lois Perry, who is salivating. She's a bit. But Amy, let me just conclude this question about Germany, for example, as a useful case study. They went very green for the last 10 years. They've spent over 200 billion euros on renewables, and they face a winter energy crisis. So it doesn't work.
But it's not enough. There's just more to be done. And that's why this summit is super important. And that is why King Charles should be there.
OK. Well, Lois Perry, what do you think about that? King Charles has certainly been consistent with his attitude to the environment. Perhaps he deserves a say. This goes beyond politics.
Mark, I actually don't even know where to start with regards to what's just been said. But what I will say is that when you have a monarch that is political, he's not a monarch, he is a dictator. You do not have people with political views on your banknotes, on your stamps, and on your pound coins. You just don't. And it is political. My polling last year showed that 58% of those that expressed an opinion in a YouGov poll wanted a net zero referendum. Recently, we did some polling when Liz Truss was contending for the leadership, that showed that 70% of Tory voters and 52% of all voters wanted a pause, at least a pause, and an examination, a re-examination of net zero policies. If that doesn't make something political, I don't know what is. And as for saying that renewables are 9 times cheaper, that is the most disingenuous load of rubbish I've ever heard in my life. It is so heavily subsidised, you can't store wind power. You have to use gas to keep the wind turbines going, which are bought from China, by the way. And COP27 is nothing to do with the environment and everything to do with the deindustrialisation of Europe and putting us back into the dark ages. And if people don't realise that, you know, that they really are in the dark, which we will all be very soon because of all this rubbish.
Nice wordplay. Lois Perry, this goes beyond politics. The planet's on fire. We're all doomed.
No, it isn't. It just isn't. If you look at every single actual document and every single scientific piece of information that isn't supplied by people that are at the green trough, which everyone at COP27 is, there are no more extreme weather events. The weather is not unusual. The climate is dictated by the sun and is cyclic. It's all nonsense. Recently, 1,100 scientists signed a thing called the Clintel Declaration, which said that they thought that CO2 had no impact whatsoever on the climate and alleged climate change. If our king speaks at COP27, he's not a monarch anymore. He's a dictator. And I say that as a monarchist and as a royalist and as someone who really, really wants him to succeed.
But the Queen spoke at COP26.
No, she didn't.
She didn't. She said we should rise above the politics of the moment and achieve true statesmanship.
Absolutely. I don't remember seeing the Queen speak at COP27.
A neutral welcome speech. She wouldn't have commented at all.
No, she was overheard allegedly saying something to somebody. She
gave
did not do a
welcome speech, and she said that.
The Queen did a speech.
Yes, a welcome speech on the opening night. That's right.
Well, here's the point. Whether she spoke or didn't speak, the key thing is that she was present at the event, Lois Perry. And so what's the difference between our late, great Queen being there and old Chaz?
I honestly don't think the Queen should have been there either.
She was there by video because her doctors told her to stay home and rest, but she was still there.
So she wasn't there then, was she?
She was there by video link.
Because she was probably told to be.
And it was important to her.
It was not important to her. She was advised that she should probably be there. But she should. Look, she was a very elderly lady.
Say a neutral welcome. Hello, have a great time. She would have done that, but she didn't. She talked about
her comments would have been written for her, but King Charles knows what's going on.
Read it beforehand.
No, he knows what's actually going on, and he must not do this. And Liz Truss is absolutely fantastic in advising him not to go. I don't think she should go either. And one other thing, Liz Truss actually voted against COP26 being hosted in Great Britain and didn't want it there. We thought it was a complete waste of money. She needs to stick to her guns, and King Charles must not attend this highly contentious, highly political, highly deindustrialising and anti-human event.
OK, final thoughts to Peter Tatchell. Peter, what is the direction of travel for this country going forward? If the King's not going to be present at COP27, where do you see Britain's role when it comes to this climate conversation in the future?
But of course, the reason Liz Truss doesn't want King Charles to go to the conference is that she's afraid that he would speak out in support of action on the climate, which would embarrass the government, given that it is giving the go-ahead for a new coal mine in Cumbria, for fracking, and for many other policies that damage the environment. And he is quite right to speak out, not on a party political basis, but on a humanitarian basis to try and save our planet. This is an existential crisis which the majority of scientists are agreed about, and we need action. And sadly, Liz Truss is rowing back from action, and that's why she doesn't want him to speak. And I think the government has to rethink its policy, because short-termism, like the government is now pursuing, is not going to help in the long term, because we face a major, major threat in this country and all countries, and therefore a climate conference where we cooperate together with other countries is the only way we're going to be able to save our humanity.
Well, let's hear from my amazing viewers who have been contacting the programme. May says King Charles is not elected. He should keep his opinions to himself. The great Elizabeth wouldn't touch politics. Elliot says, of course, he should stay out of it. It's intensely political. And as he's the king now, he has to stay out of politics regardless of what he might wish. Margaret. Hello, Margaret. How are you? Thanks for watching the show. Margaret says Liz was right to advise King Charles not to attend. It will save his kingship. He must follow his mother's example to be popular. The verdict is in, folks. Now, I want my guest's opinion on this. 86% of our viewers agree that King Charles should stay out of the climate debate. 14% say he's right to get involved. Amy, final thoughts.
Well, I disagree with the majority. He should be there. He is a passionate, lifelong environmental campaigner. I believe it's not a political conference or summit. It is simply environmental. And if the leaders of the world don't get together and talk about the issues at hand, which are super serious, and it's a crisis, then we're in big trouble.
OK, and Lois?
Well, it just shows how fantastically clever and clued up GB viewers are.
Who knew? Short and sweet. Look, a very grown-up debate. That's what this place is all about. My profound thanks to Amy Ansell, human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell, and Director of Climate Action and Reason 26, Lois Perry. And, of course, Amy Ansell is an entrepreneur and broadcaster. Really enjoyed our conversation, but what do you think? Dan at gbnews.uk. Keep those opinions coming. Next up, why is Wales's First Minister Mark Drakeford running scared of a COVID inquiry? What's he afraid of? Positive Professor Carol Sikora takes the lockdown authoritarian to task at 9:50. But first, why do we demonise the wealthy when all that matters is the poor getting richer? That's what former Tory minister and political firebrand Anne Widdecombe has been asking in her brilliant Daily Express column. She's next.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Lovely to have your company. It's Mark Dolan in for Dan Wootton, and it's time now for Big Widdy Style with Anne Widdecombe. Now, Liz Truss today travelled to Prague for the inaugural European Political Community, where the energy and migrant crises were high on the agenda. And while she got a frosty reception from fellow European leaders, who forced her to the back of the group photo, it was nothing compared to the hostility from within her own party at home. Unlike her idol Margaret Thatcher, Truss proved that the lady is for turning after backing down on the 45p top rate tax cut. Back in the year 1990, the Iron Lady herself was facing similar objections on the economy when she uttered these immortal lines in the Commons.
Mr. Speaker, all levels of income are better off than they were in 1979. But what the honourable member is saying is that he would rather the poor were poorer, provided the rich were less rich. That way you will never create the wealth for better social services as we have.
And echoing Thatcher in her excellent column for the Daily Express, Anne Widdecombe writes of the economy, it does not matter if the rich get richer. What matters is that the poor get better off too. And for that, we need economic growth. Oh, dear. Anne Widdecombe for Prime Minister. Hi, Anne.
Hello, Mark. Hi.
Anne, tell me why we need to love bomb the rich.
Because it's the rich who actually stimulate the economy and who make the money. People who draw their salaries from the public sector, and I was one for years because I was an MP. I was paid from the public purse. I didn't actually make a penny of that money. I drew it in return for work. The people who make the money, who invest, are the business people, the risk takers, the bankers, the people who get investment into this country, which produces the growth. And that's what it's all about. And anybody who can remember, how the less well-off used to live a few decades ago can see with their own two eyes that the poor are better off too. And that is what matters. It's the standard of living and the help for the poor, not trying to penalise the rich just because one envies them their wealth.
History teaches us, Anne Widdecombe, that if you clobber the middle and upper classes, it's a race to the bottom.
Well, we found that when the Labour Party introduced a 60p top rate of tax, and the result was a brain drain. And people didn't want to come here. But when it was then reduced to 40% by Thatcher, lo and behold, the tax take from that income bracket actually went up, not down, because the incentives to have great accountancy schemes and offshore and all the rest of it just disappeared. And it was worth taking the extra risk. It was worth putting in the extra a few hours of work every day. It was worth it because people kept their own money.
Now, Anne, Liz Truss was in high spirits yesterday as she arrived on stage for her conference speech. Let's have a quick reminder. A bold and positive vision for Britain. Did you buy it, Anne?
I bought the fact that she does have a bold and positive vision. What I don't buy is that she's going to be able to put it into action. I mean, we had all that talk about how they were not for turning, they were really going to stick to the upper rate tax reduction because it was the right thing to do. And then quite suddenly they caved in. Now, if that's going to be the pattern, which is the Grand Old Duke of York, you lead your troops up the hill and then halfway up you lead them down again, that is what Liz Truss has effectively done. So I trust her vision. What I don't trust at the moment is her leadership. But having said that, it isn't exactly her fault. The Conservative Party is an undisciplined rabble. I mean, that is just a fact of life. And you've even got the spectacle at the moment of members of the Cabinet. I mean, the Cabinet, not just rebellious backbenchers, the Cabinet, pre-stating their position on issues before you actually have the debate. So they've started stating their position on the benefit cuts, for example, before any benefit cuts have even been announced. We don't even know if they're going to happen. So there is just no discipline there at all. From the very top to the very newest backbencher in the Conservative Party, there is no discipline. And that was what used to make the party. And I've said this before, but there used to be a standing joke in the Tory Parliamentary Party when I was there, that if the chief whip said, jump out of the window, we would form an orderly queue in front of the window. There was discipline. None now, and she's not going to get that back overnight because the habit's there, and people who should be setting an example, such as those in the Cabinet and senior backbenchers like Michael Gove, are doing the exact opposite. They've lost it. They don't understand collective responsibility anymore.
When will the Sunak Spartans bury the hatchet, because that's the issue, isn't it? All of those bitter former cabinet ministers and those backbenchers who supported Rishi Sunak, who dream of unseating Liz Truss and installing Dishy Rishi by Christmas. This is for the birds. It's madness, isn't it?
Well, if that's what they really think, then it is serious madness. Another leadership election would be the final nail in the Conservative Party's coffin. What we now need, and it's only 2 years, for heaven's sake, it's only 2 years. What we now need is policies boldly conceived and put into effect. And if Liz is going to be perpetually frustrated by her own party, then the voters will put Keir Starmer in with a very, very large majority indeed. I can remember the major years when the party was riven with dissent over Europe, in that case, and regularly rebelling. And I can remember those years, though it was a haven of discipline compared with what it is now. And, of course, the result was a huge Blair victory.
Well, that's right, Anne. 2 years is a long time. It's a great opportunity. She has an 80-seat majority, although we know that this divided party creates the impression at times of a hung parliament. But if she plays a diplomatic and defence role when it comes to Ukraine, perhaps helping to broker a deal between Russia and Ukraine, if she goes for growth in the economy, if she tackles the migrant crisis in the Channel, if she gets those flights to Rwanda in the air, and if she manages to resolve the Northern Ireland Protocol, it's all to play for. She can win in 2025.
There's a lot there to play for. I don't know that she can broker a deal between Russia and the Ukraine. If she can do that, she's badly needed in the Middle East. But I do think she can do the other things, the domestic things, which you have mentioned. I think it is crucial to get on top of the Northern Ireland problem. And I was horrified to hear Steve Baker, of all people, Northern Ireland minister, talking about eating humble pie and taking a more conciliatory approach towards the EU. The EU have used Northern Ireland to bash Britain for Brexit. And it's time we stood up for ourselves, and Liz Truss must do that. And as for this political union, what is she doing? We left the EU precisely to get away from political union.
And always a thrill to have you on the show. And what a brilliant column in the Daily Express. I highly recommend it if you can get hold of a copy of the paper or check it out online at express.co.uk. Thanks, Anne. Catch up soon. Coming up, after Lee Anderson MP is provoked into knocking a protester's phone out of their hand, despite a week of abuse at the Tory party conference, are politicians allowed to have human reactions? Is it OK for them to occasionally be a human being? My panel will debate that in the Media Buzz at 10. And the first newspaper front pages are on the way as well. But first, why is Wales's First Minister Mark Drakeford running scared of a COVID inquiry? Why does he fear scrutiny for his endless lockdowns? Positive Professor Carol Sikora is coming up.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
It's Mark Dolan in for Dan Wootton. Lovely to have your company. In the next hour, one of the best-selling authors of all time, Lord, the remarkable Lord. Isn't that a beautiful thing on live telly? Of course, here's his book, Jeffrey Archer. I should have said Jeffrey Archer because then I remember. But anyway, an amazing author, former deputy chairman of the Tory party. We'll talk about the state of the Tories and selling almost 300 million books. Easy for you to remember, Lord Jeffrey Archer after 10. A first look at tomorrow's papers very shortly as well, but it's time now for our positive professor, Carol Sikora. Now, the UK's official inquiry into the COVID-19 pandemic kicked off in London this week, but families of victims in Wales are angry that their nation isn't getting its own independent probe. Welsh First Minister Mark Drakeford was slammed yesterday for alleging that families of COVID victims in Wales wanted to move on without an inquiry. But he was quickly pulled up by furious Andrew Davies, leader of the Welsh Conservatives, who accused Drakeford of making it up. Take a look.
I believe from the meetings I've had with them, I've met with them 5 times, that unlike the leader of the opposition, they are moving on from continuing to ask for something which is not going to happen.
Stop misrepresenting their view, First Minister. Yes. Only today they've repeated the request for an independent inquiry here in Wales, and through you not allowing such an inquiry to happen, they have had to accept that the UK route is the best route for them to have these explored.
The leader of the opposition can, of course, go on making his case for as long and as loudly as he likes. In the meantime, the world has moved on.
Today, politicians and campaigners are calling for Drakeford to withdraw his comments, with both the Welsh Conservatives and Plaid Cymru writing to the First Minister. Nearly 11,000 people died with COVID in Wales during the pandemic. So just who is tin pot politician Drakeford to tell the bereaved families that the world has moved on? Did he miss the part where our nation was crippled and teetering on an economic cliff edge over the COVID insanity that he partly oversaw? Professor Carol Sikora, let's talk about this now. Why do you think that Mark Drakeford is running scared?
He's running scared, but it's completely crazy what he tried to do. What he did was to show Wales was doing better than England. And this is absolute nonsense. He didn't have better advisors. There are no better scientists in Wales advising him. He just wanted to show that Wales could do what they wanted to do. A small country, independent. I remember vividly, we have a cancer centre in Newport. I would go through the tunnel on the train, through the Severn Tunnel, and you had to wear a mask when you got out the other side. And people shouted at you if you weren't wearing a mask. Even though I come from England. And then, oh, even worse, that would get them really going. So if you said you were exempt, they had to shut up. And that's what I did in the end. But if you said, I'm from England, I don't wear a mask, they didn't like it. It was just crazy politics. And this guy, I mean, a tin pot politician, really a tin pot politician, of no value to anybody and costing a lot of money. The policies in Wales costed a lot of money and they actually costed a lot of lives. And that's the sad thing in terms of cancer, in terms of other issues. And that's why he doesn't want an inquiry. He doesn't want to be shown up as a weakling, as the wrong policy to take. Why not follow the UK? Let's be one country. That's what he should have done. But he wanted to be different. That's the truth, Matt.
But, Carol, my concern is that inquiries happening elsewhere may not focus on the elephant in the room, and that's whether lockdowns were a mistake.
Exactly so. And, you know, we know that the weekly death rate, even now, as we speak, is higher than it should be. It's higher than it's ever been in the last 5 years. And scientists in Oxford have proven this. They keep putting out these bulletins every week. No one talks about them, but there's no doubt. And It's nothing to do with COVID. It's to do with the other things that COVID affected. The fact the NHS, whether it's in Wales or in England, it doesn't matter, moved over to COVID. So people with cancer, with heart disease, with stroke, with other illnesses didn't get treated. And we're left with this awful inheritance of 6.8 million people waiting for something from the NHS. And that number's probably an underestimate of what it really is. Probably 10 million people are waiting for something and they're not getting it. It may be a scan, it may be a biopsy. It's something they need that they can't get. And that's going to create disease, unpleasantness for the next 5 years at least.
Carol, elsewhere on the COVID front, reports today claim at least 5 NHS trusts in England have brought back face masks amid COVID's apparent resurgence. Sites in Suffolk, Essex and Gloucestershire now require all visitors to wear a mask, while some trust bosses are even threatening to ban visitors completely in the coming weeks. I thought we'd moved on from this mask madness. Masks are not great in a medical setting, are they? Particularly for diagnosis and doctor-patient relations.
Absolutely not. I can't even hear patients when they wear masks, and it's mainly elderly people that are wearing them. I think the problem for the future is getting away from it. I mean, it is a respiratory infection, just like rhinovirus, just like influenza, and we've got to treat it as such. But there's no need to panic about it. And unfortunately, everywhere you go, people are scared. Even the coronavirus booster jab centres now insist that you wear a mask as you go in. I had mine last week, so I know. My arm is still sore, if I can say so. But the problem for the future is getting away from the fear from this. It's just an upper respiratory infection. You should be as afraid of COVID as rhinovirus, which is the big deal at the moment as we come into winter. These rhinoviruses who have been around for many, many years are as scary as corona. And yet people are not scared because there's no media emphasis on it.
Here's a question for you, Carol. Do masks make a blind bit of difference, especially those very cheap, flimsy surgical masks which are handed out at the entrance to hospitals?
Absolutely not. They make no difference at all. And when you look at most people wearing them, they've got their nose showing. It's just not on. You have to have a proper mask. I feel like when I go into London from here, I live in Beaconsfield, and I go in on the train, I should wear a full Ebola kit, with a hat and the whole gear, just to scare people. They'd all move out their car. I'd certainly get a seat, I think, Mark, don't you think? But I think the future is getting away from the fear that corona's caused. We've got to get away from it as a society. And it's the same all over the world. Different countries have responded in different ways. Wales, of course, a separate country, responded its way. That's how we got into this conversation. I went to Canada a month ago. They're still in the thrall of having vaccine certificates. Go to a restaurant, show your passport, your vaccine passport. I mean, it's just craziness. I mean, it's one disease. There are all sorts of other diseases out there. You could be just as valid saying, demand the proof that you haven't got it.
Indeed. Well, you're not the positive professor for no reason, Carol. Are thrilled to have you on the show, and we'll see you in a week's time. Professor Carol Sikora. It's exactly 10 o'clock. I'm Mark Dolan, in for Dan Wootton, and coming up with a... I'm an eager beaver tonight, with the Conservatives at each other's throats and potentially destined for the opposition. Party grandee Lord Jeffrey Archer gives sage advice on how the Tories can turn their fortunes around. Plus, the multi-million selling author, one of the most successful of all time, reveals all about his new thriller starring his good friend Princess Diana. Lord Jeffrey Archer is live at 10. You won't want to miss it. Now, this is how Tory MP Lee Anderson responded after getting screamed at by a protester after a week of lefty hate at Tory party conference. Take a look.
People's lives! Tory lies cost people's lives! Got anything to say for yourself?
But what do you reckon? Was he justified? Are politicians allowed to have human reactions? My superstar panel are split on this. Tonight, their Conservative commentator Dominique Samuels Former Tory London mayoral candidate Sean Bailey and author and broadcaster Amy Nickel. As hundreds of thousands of nurses threaten a historic strike, the first in over 100 years, do carers have a moral duty to keep on working, or are they the ones most deserving of fair pay? That's at 10:30. What do you think? To strike or not to strike? That is the question. Also, was America and the world safer when Donald Trump was president? Social media sensation Zubi thinks so. He's uncancelled at 10:45. Plus, it's fair to say that the Prince and Princess of Wales' trip to Northern Ireland didn't go exactly as planned. Take a look.
Nice to meet you. When you're in country.
It would be better if you weren't in our country. What a bigot. Well, we'll discuss that, plus tomorrow's newspaper front page is coming up in the media buzz. And the power is in my hands as I name the final Greatest Britain and Union Jackass of the week at 10:50. Lots to get through. Lord Jeffrey Archer in a couple of minutes. But first, the news with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Mark. Here's the latest from the GB Newsroom. Prince Harry and Elton John are among a group of people suing the publisher of the Daily Mail over what lawyers are describing as gross breaches of privacy. A warning for those watching on TV, the following footage contains flashing images. The lawsuit alleges that Associated Newspapers hired private investigators to secretly place listening devices inside people's cars and homes. It also claims private phone calls were recorded and sensitive medical and financial information obtained. The mother of murdered teenager Stephen Lawrence is also a claimant, along with Elizabeth Hurley and Sadie Frost. Associated Newspapers has refuted the claims, describing them as preposterous. 3-hour blackouts could be introduced across the UK this winter if the country fails to secure enough natural gas. The warning from the National Grid electricity system operator comes as Europe struggles with restricted energy supplies caused by Russia's war with Ukraine. The Liberal Democrats are calling on the government to hold an emergency Cobra meeting. However, the Prime Minister says the UK can get through the winter.
We're working very hard on energy security. It's one of the reasons I'm here in Prague today. We have interconnectors with our European partners. We're working on more gas supplies. We're working on building out nuclear energy, building out wind energy, so we do have a secure supply of energy.
Well, UK banks are calling on the Chancellor to extend the government's mortgage guarantee scheme amid surging interest rates. The scheme protects banks against losses when lending to first-time buyers. The average 5-year fixed-rate mortgage is now more than 6%. That's the highest level for more than a decade. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says it's a direct result of Kwasi Kwarteng's mini-budget.
We had a kamikaze mini-budget 2 weeks ago. As a direct consequence, mortgages are going up, and not by a little. You know, hundreds of pounds. £500 is the average per month. Now, there are not many people, not many families that can afford that kind of increase. Sometimes these things happen because of some world event. This is self-inflicted.
In the US, an active shooting situation has been unfolding in Dearborn, Michigan. Local police saying they're negotiating with the suspect who's holed up in a local hotel. Earlier shots were fired at the Hampton Inn, with reports of one fatality. Police are describing the situation as extremely dangerous. They're urging the public to stay away. The US president has announced plans to pardon anyone with a federal conviction for simple marijuana possession. Joe Biden says it will help people to get employment, housing and educational opportunities. He's directed the Attorney General to implement the decision. The president is also urging state governors to follow suit. We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Back now to Mark.
Tomorrow's news tonight in our media buzz. Let's kick off with the very first look at tomorrow's front pages, and we begin with the Metro, and they lead with the following. A winter of disconnect, cracking headline, I've got to say. Warning of 3-hour blackouts being imposed. Power cuts in unlikely event of a gas shortage. Homes and businesses could face power cuts lasting 3 hours a day this winter, according to a dire warning from the National Grid. OK, next up, let's go to the Star. New advice to stop blackout Britain. Wash your grundies at midnight. Chaw blimey, say the Daily Star. Energy bosses will pay us to wash our undies in the early hours to stop the Great British Blackout. 3-hour power cuts? That's pants, say the Daily Star. There you go. Promotion to James Caven, their reporter there, for some excellent pun action. And last but not least at this stage, The Independent. Nursery children killed in Thai massacre, a truly horrific story. Scenes of despair in Thailand yesterday after an ex-policeman's knife and gun rampage left nearly 4 dead. There are just no words. Also, Britain could face rolling blackouts this winter, say The Independent. British households face rolling blackouts if gas imports fall short this winter, according to the National Grid. The Ukraine war has disrupted supplies and created unprecedented turmoil and volatility in the energy markets, adding that there could be pre-planned power cuts in 3-hour slots. There you go. We're headed for a cold, dark winter. But we're here to warm the cockles of your heart. Do keep it GB News. If you're enjoying the show and if you're enjoying the channel, then tell your friends, tell your family, and let's change the world together. Now, reacting to the big stories of the day, my superstar panel, political commentator Dominique Samuels, former Tory London mayoral candidate Sean Bailey, and author and broadcaster Amy Nickel. Now, Conservative MP Lee Anderson has sparked fury online after an altercation with a Disabled People's Alliance protester was captured on camera outside the party's conference yesterday. Take a look.
Tory lies cost people's lives. 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 Got anything to say for yourself?
Hard not to laugh, isn't it? Well, those kinds of aggressive encounters have been a theme of the week in Birmingham as left-wing protesters regularly confronted Tory MPs, including Michael Fabricant and Jacob Rees-Mogg, simply for going into the conference hall. Take a look at this. That's not protest, is it? That's harassment. So are politicians allowed to have human reactions? Sean Bailey, you are a politician or a former politician, maybe a politician in the future. What's your reaction to those scenes that played out, particularly Lee Anderson essentially slapping a phone out of someone's hand?
I tell you what, yes, people are allowed human reactions, and it's a double standard of the left. If Tory activists were doing that to Labour MPs, there'd be all manner of hand-wringing. We'd be talking about the Labour MPs as heroes for surviving it all. But let's be very clear, Tory MPs get much more abuse of that manner because people on the left, and I'm directing this directly at the Labour Party, support it. They don't call out the activists for doing it. In fact, they support it. And remember, hold on, right. I remember when we were talking about Tory scum, this exactly the same word you heard that protester repeat. And the reason I'm so excited about this all is because I was at conference and I watched it. It's pure 100% bullying, and it's a sign, it's a tactic of the left. And what they often do, they try to get in your face, so you have that very human reaction, so you end up in trouble with the police. It's a deliberate tactic. And unless somebody senior from the Labour Party starts to call it out and regularly call it out, I hold the Labour Party responsible.
That's nonsense, though, because if somebody smacked Keir Starmer's phone out of his hands... if Keir Starmer smacked a phone out of someone's hand, there'd be absolute uproar. Keir Starmer couldn't even have a korma and a beer without the police getting involved.
Well, let's be clear, he's less likely to ever have to do that because, people don't react, people don't treat Labour MPs that way because Tory MPs don't support them when they do.
Yeah, but also because there's like a different level of responsibility. If you're Keir Starmer, leader of the opposition, it's highly unlikely your security is even going to put you in a position where someone's literally barking in your face with a phone. Same if it was Liz Truss. The problem is that, yes, people should have the right to voice their opinion, perhaps aggressively, if you will, but there's a difference between that and invading someone's personal space, shouting at them in their face with your phone, and he got a response. And
but that wasn't a measured response. That a human response? That was a completely untethered, short. It showed it was a thuggish response.
It wasn't.
He's an MP.
To be honest, I do find that sort of language, because I've seen it online as well. People calling him a thug. I do think there are quite classist, snobbish undertones.
Absolutely not. He smacked...
Because it is, we see it a lot with working-class Tory politicians. They don't have sort of the typical London accent. They do come across a bit more
He didn't even speak
a bit more rough around the edges.
It was nothing to do with that.
Now, all of a sudden, because he smacked a phone out of someone's hand...
That's literally criminal damage.
Well, I suspect, Amy, knowing Lee Anderson, that he regrets his reaction.
Well,
I suspect.
You should say so.
And I doubt that that's a hill that he's willing to die on. He'll probably said... It's interesting. I'm not obviously here to defend his actions, but... The way that he was being cajoled like that was harassment, wasn't it?
I don't think either of them were correct in the way they conducted themselves, but I think Lee Anderson's reaction is the problem here.
No, was he provoked? Like John Prescott when he had an egg thrown at him?
He was provoked in a completely understandable way, considering his position. He's an MP. People are going to disagree with the things that he says and does.
There for me is the disgusting double standard. Just because he doesn't hold the same position as someone on the left, it's understandable. No, it is not. If someone on the right did, it doesn't matter if he's an MP, he's still a human. And at the end of the day, people screaming in his face, phoning him to intimidate him. The clip you just showed of Michael Fabricant, right, if that was a normal member of the public, they'd have probably punched the fella just out of fear, just out of pure fear.
Michael Fabricant defended those people.
If somebody walked up on you on the street in a manner that was just done, he would be in your right to sort of push himself up. What was their intention? And let's be clear, on the television, it looks like isolated incidences. If you're at conference, you'll see that it's a 24-hour campaign
it was everybody that went into conference, including members of the team, reporters here for GB News, including one of our producers, David, who luckily is built like a brick shithouse, so you won't mess with him. But, the bottom line is that the left seems to have a problem with other people taking a different view. Where were the protesters at Labour Party conference from the right?
Exercising their right in a free democracy to disagree with what an MP is doing.
It's not the difference.
People, and also, if you talk about harassment, what about 16 front pages about Keir Starmer having that beer in that korma? That's harassment to me.
It wasn't. Well, Boris had 100.
There's a difference between a newspaper and random people in the street.
I don't know why you would be surprised.
At no point did Keir Starmer
being at a political conference.
No. It's the manner. It's the manner. At no point did Keir Starmer look at the newspaper and feel like someone might punch him. At no point did someone wave a phone out of the newspaper in his face. It's an entirely different thing. And when you're there with large groups of people blowing horns in your face, calling you Tory scum and all other things, this is a family show, I won't use the same language they did, right? It is actually intimidating. Yeah. And just because you're an MP, just because you hold a different point of view is no excuse. And unless people on the left condemn it, they are condoning it.
So do you think that in that clip that Lee Anderson was the least intimidating of the two involved? Because to me,
he was completely... and the other was having words shouted in his face.
With the phone.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a double standard, this.
I disagree, because I defended the Education Secretary. I can't remember her name. She was the one in...
Andrea Jenkins. For giving the middle finger to protesters.
I won't demonstrate, because as Sean said, it's a family show. I defended that because I think that was a human reaction, but this wasn't. This was too far. This demonstrated how much anger and resentment got in him.
You don't think that guy with the phone in his face, calling people all manner of names...
From the Disability Alliance?
What a threatening bunch they are. There's no suggestion that he was disabled. Are you suggesting that what he did is fine?
I think he's well in his rights to have that view.
That says it all to me.
And I think say it at a political conference. He's not
But
come
Sean,
up to
was
him
he
in
not
the
exercising
supermarket.
free speech?
No, free speech is about a cordial exchange of views. He was waving his phone in the man's face, intimidatingly shouting at him, calling him Tory
I don't
scum.
think he was intimidating.
I'm sorry,
And he wasn't calling him
but
Tory
you
scum.
don't get to
He said-
decide. You don't get to decide what's intimidating. And maybe, Amy, I'm speaking from a slightly bit of knowledge because obviously I walked in and out a number of times. But the point is that is not free speech. That is not
If
free
you can't
speech. That is
handle that type of
intimidation.
thing, you probably shouldn't be in politics.
But you shouldn't have to.
Of course you should.
But the issue is these politicians get it 24/7, don't they? So I wonder whether Lee Anderson has just soaked up a lot of this abuse for a week and he's snapped because he's a human being. And that's the nature of the chat, is can politicians be human? Not helped by the likes of Angela Rayner, the deputy leader of the Labour Party, who on a political platform called Conservative supporters Tory scum. Or she I think, was Conservative politicians. She called them Tory scum. So she's invoked the S word. We've got to change the language around politics, and politicians of the left must condemn this. Will they?
No.
I think it's very difficult because she didn't come to that conclusion out of thin air, did she? She came.
So
to
that's okay to call opponents scum?
I don't think that was okay, and I think that was probably. But I can see where emotive. I can see where it came from.
I think this is a part of...
Obviously, you don't totally disagree with that, but I don't.
But I think this is the protesting style that we're seeing, which is shouting in people's faces, intimidating them. We've seen it with Antifa as well. People in masks, just being aggressive and
Trans
violent.
activists.
Yeah, with the trans
at
activists.
feminist marches.
It's a new type of campaigning and protesting.
It's a new type of campaigning and protesting.
It's more about intimidation and
that was
trying
not,
to
that
silence
clip was
people
not about
before they
intimidation
can
at all.
voice
That's
their
somebody
views.
that's got to the end of their tether. The country is at the end of their tether with what these policies and what these politicians are doing. To the vast
you
ways
don't know
of-
that, though.
It doesn't make it. I'm at the end. I'm at the end of my tether. I thought Tony Blair was one of the worst things that's happened to the Western world. I didn't run up and shout in his face, did I? I didn't wave my phone.
You just used your vote at the earliest opportunity.
I disagree. No, I disagree. No, I disagree with that.
Protest.
I disagree with that because, you know, voting shouldn't be the only avenue in which people air their grievances, because specifically in this country, I don't think there is actually ample enough opportunity to make seismic change via voting. So I disagree with you that what he was doing wasn't free speech. It is free speech. He shouldn't be, arrested for what he said. But there's a difference between being passionate. If someone in the street shouted at Tony Blair and called him scum, I would probably clap my hands because I think that he is. I'm sorry. But there's a difference between that and invading someone's
Well, I
space.
think, Dominic, we've seen a different tone of debate and free speech. For example, during the COVID pandemic, do you remember when the owner of a pub in the West Country, in Bath, confronted Keir Starmer about his support for the COVID restrictions?
I agreed
now,
with that.
he didn't yell at Keir Starmer, but Keir Starmer popped into his pub and he seized the opportunity to say, yes, talked about the pub, but also just essentially engaged in a debate with Keir Starmer.
Yeah, and
no voices were raised, but free speech was had.
I mean, the guy was raising his voice. He was shouting at him to get out of his pub.
You say?
But, he was shouting at him and the security was getting involved. Personally, I think that sort of on Amy's wavelength in terms of it's that guy's business, so he's passionate about it. But he didn't get into Keir Starmer's space.
But Keir Starmer and Lee Anderson get into our space every single day with the way they are behaving in Parliament. They are. So I think that's why people
Amy, are the left, protesters on the left, more vicious and less democratically minded, less tolerant than those on the right?
I don't think so.
Yes, they are. They are.
Well, no, answer that. Why, offer your argument as to why they're not.
If we want to go to the far right, I haven't seen a very friendly BNP rally lately. Like, there's passionate protest activism on both sides of the coin. And
but we see more of it from the left.
No, that's because you're looking for it.
Even the event in Brighton recently that Posey Parker was at, is Kelly, what's her name, Kellyanne?
Who says
Posey
trans
Parker.
women are men.
Yes. Kellyanne Conway.
Yeah, Kellyanne Conway. She did a Let Women Speak event in Brighton. That was swarms of people from the Labour Party, from Antifa, masked, can't see the face, they're quite friendly, shouting at people. One person that worked for a Labour Party politician screaming that, a father is going to teach their baby to grow up to be transphobic because they believe in biological sex. Like, it seems to come from the left.
Yes, Kelly Jane Keane, of course, that was the feminist campaigner. Look, this one will continue and it will rumble clearly as a debate. We're having a bit of trouble getting the line to the wonderful Jeffrey Archer, but we're working on it. We've got a break coming. But have we got time for the Princess of Wales? OK, now, quickly, before the break, Princess of Wales today showed how to handle hecklers with grace when she was challenged by an Irish nationalist during a walkabout in Northern Ireland. Have a look.
Nice to meet you. That would be better focus when you're in your own country. Hi, welcome to Belfast. Thank you. You're very welcome. Ireland belongs to the Irish.
Well, I guess that's free speech as well. Look, lots more to come, but we are going to debate next. More stories from the front pages. And, of course, more reactions from my superstar panel. So very, very busy 40 minutes to go. We're going to talk about whether nurses should be allowed to go on strike. Does that cross a moral line? Will people die if they do hang up their nurses' uniforms? We'll discuss that next. Plus, would the world and America be a safer place if Donald Trump was still president? See you in 2.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Well, more reaction to the big stories of the day with my superstar panel of political commentator Dominique Samuels, former Tory London mayoral candidate Sean Bailey, and author and broadcaster Amy Nickel. Lots to get our teeth into. In just a moment, is it morally wrong for nurses to go on strike? They haven't done so for over 100 years. But first, tomorrow's papers. And let's start with... We'll kick off with the eye, if we can. Electricity blackout warning this winter. UK faces rolling blackouts if it cannot import enough energy from Europe, according to the national grid. Millions of homes would have electricity cut for 3 hours at a time in a worst-case scenario. Power cuts would need approval from King Charles and the government under current legislation. Well, will there be blackouts in the palace as well? Can't imagine there would be. These will be the first blackouts since the 70s and are unlikely, some say, unless the UK has a cold snap. So here's hoping that the weather is kind this winter. Next up, The Guardian. Rolling power cuts could put lives at risk, charities tell the national grid. Also, Daily Mail publisher faces legal challenge. Doreen Lawrence and Prince Harry are among a list of famous figures launching legal action against the publisher of the Daily Mail over the alleged misuse of their private information. including an accusation relating to the placing of listening devices in private homes. Sir Elton John, David Furnish, Liz Hurley and Sadie Frost are other claimants. Could this be a repeat of the phone hacking scandal? Well, the Mail and their associated titles deny all allegations. Let's have a look now at the Daily Telegraph. UK warned it could face winter blackouts. Power could be cut for 3 hours a day if Britain is unable to import enough energy. I do hope you'll be saving those 3 hours for GB News. Also, protocol too strict, admits Ireland's Varadkar. The Northern Ireland Protocol, which is, of course, the invisible border down the Irish Sea, is a little too strict, according to Ireland's Deputy Prime Minister Leo Varadkar. Possibly there, a chink of hope when it comes to Britain's negotiations with the EU. Also, Rees-Mogg backs plan for coronation bank holiday when King Charles gets his crown. The Sun next. Exclusive, shamed comic is back. I do like it when comedians reinvent themselves. Strictly Snogger Sean Walsh signs up for ITV Jungle. I'm a celebrity. Strictly Love Rat Sean Walsh has signed up for I'm a Celebrity. ITV bosses hope the comic will finally tell all about his snog with pro-partner on Strictly, Katya Jones. Their shock romance in 2018 ended the dancer's marriage and his own 5-year relationship. Well, I know Sean Walsh is a very talented guy, and it's good to see him bounce back in such a fashion. The Daily Mail now. Blackout deal sparks a storm. Households are being offered £10 a day to cut electric usage at peak times in a bid to avoid winter blackouts. You see, I like that. That's more carrot than stick. Also, Kate keeps her cool with critic. Kate, Princess of Wales, of course, smiles as a woman in a crowd in Northern Ireland says, "Nice to meet you, but Ireland belongs to the Irish."
That's how you do it. You don't knock the phone on anyone.
Well, I agree. I think they both come off quite well in that particular engagement. And last but not least, the Daily Express. Homes face 3-hour winter power cuts. To head off power cuts caused by the war in Ukraine hitting gas supplies, millions of households will be paid around £100 to use less energy. And those are your front pages. OK, well, let's get reaction from my panel. There's another big story floating about, which we must bring our attention to. Hundreds of thousands of nurses could go on strike this winter as the Royal College of Nursing prepares to ballot its members for the first time in its 106-year history. The union is recommending members vote in favour of the ballot that's in protest at the government's decision in July to award most NHS staff a 5% pay rise. They're demanding nurses get 15%, and other groups of NHS workers, including junior doctors, are also threatening to walk out over pay. The union's General Secretary and Chief Executive Pat Cullen told members the following. Governments have repeatedly neglected the NHS and the value of nursing. This is a once-in-a-generation chance to improve your pay and combat the staff shortages that put patients at risk. Today, Liz Truss praised nurses' heroic work, but stood firmly behind the government's original offer.
What we have offered nurses is a £1,400 pay rise that was recommended by the pay review body. So I do hope that they will continue to work through this winter. But I do want to say a great thank you to our nurses for the brilliant job they do.
Cullen also insisted that critical care would still go ahead in the event of a strike, but would striking nurses be putting patients at risk? Do carers have a moral duty to keep working? Sean.
Look, the first thing to be said is that the nurses' strike, if it goes ahead, they'll make provisions to keep patients safe. They've made that as a commitment. And as a body of people, I don't think you...
How can they, Sean?
Because they can work their rosters properly. They can parcel out the work slightly differently. I don't think you become a nurse to put patients at danger. That's the first thing. And secondly, I do think there is a moral argument for them not to strike because, you know, it puts people at risk, but hopefully they'll cover that. But also we need to make sure that we support them and then make sure they have a way of expressing their wants and needs. You know, binding arbitration, for instance, so it's done independently so they get the pay rises they deserve. But I think the wider, broader piece around this sort of winter of discontent and strikes everywhere, I now am starting to look at which unions are linked to the Labour Party. Because if a union is linked to the Labour Party, I then start to think, is this a deliberate political exercise in order to weaken the government? That's how I'm beginning to see it. Now, I don't know if this union is. I will go back and have a check. But the first thing that I have to say is we need to look at the pay awards we give people and link it to what's going on broadly in the economy. Because I think sometimes people in the private sector want to be sheltered from the reality of the economy, but people in the public sector want to get sheltered from the reality of the economy, and people in the private sector don't have that. But yet, there's people who earn less than nurses who will suffer even more if we keep giving big pay awards and they don't get those pay awards as well.
So do you think they should stick to the 5%? Do you think that's fair?
Look, the government have made a 5% pay award, £1,400. I don't think anybody in a low-paid job in the private sector will be receiving anything like that. And that's my point. There should be a link between what we pay people in the public sector and what we pay people in the private sector, because one of the things I notice if you're in the private sector, the size of your pension is tiny compared to what public sector workers get. So it's about a proper comparison for me.
Yes. Amy, what do you think about this? Can the nurses justify their first strike in 106 years?
I think with any strike action, you have to remember that it's a last resort, and I wouldn't put it at the door of the nurses. I would put it at the door of the government. I think it's hilarious that Liz Truss says, thank you, nurses, so here's a real terms pay cut. At the moment, nurses, there are hospitals where there are food banks available for nurses to use. So the question should really be rephrased, do we think nurses should be paid fairly? And surely we all would say yes.
I think the problem with it is whether or not they deserve a pay rise. I think because overall it is a real terms pay cut, because everyone gets a flat rate of £1,400. For some people at different pay bands, that will translate to about 2%, really, 2% rise in their pay. That is an argument. I understand it. But what's been offered at this pivotal time is, the 1,400 flat rate, 5%. If we ask for any more, they want 15%. Where is this money going to come from? The pay rises, let me finish, the pay rises have been funded previously by actually cutting services in the NHS from other areas, which means that patients suffer, but also existing staff suffer, whether or not they have a pay rise, because then that's less resources. It's OK to talk about pay rise, but where is that money?
But when it came to this whole 45% tax cut, that money magically appeared, and you were very happy to borrow all that money.
Yeah, but hold on. But Amy, this is the thing, is that it's very easy to say these things and act like you're all magnanimous. But let's be clear that you cannot borrow for a revenue outgoing, because you're going to have to keep paying it. And also that tax cut, which isn't happening, but that potentially would have brought in even more money that you then could have used. The point is this: you cannot separate too far the pay of people in the public sector from people in the private sector, because you always talk about the private sector, talk about bankers and the like, but actually my friend works in a chip shop. Is he going to get £1,400?
Your friend that works in the chip shop probably earns more than a nurse at the moment. That's the problem. So nurses are leaving the profession to work in care homes because they're being paid more. They're not being paid the correct amount for their skill.
£3,000 a year. That's the average salary. And it can go.
And you don't get that.
There are about 100,000 vacancies in the NHS, and the NHS is hemorrhaging those jobs because they don't have the retention, because people are overworked and underpaid, and they cannot stay in the roles.
The problem is, it's not whether or not they deserve it at this point. It's that we're at a time in the economy where we're discussing energy blackouts, where we're discussing going into a recession.
Then don't expect good care, because it's impossible.
But where is this 15% pay rise going to come from? It may well be funded by cuts to other areas in the NHS, which long-term won't benefit the workers and won't benefit patients.
The thing that is remarkable is that the same people that were clapping for our NHS are now criticising a potential strike by nurses.
Are you talking about me or
she's talking about the government. That's not fair. They're not criticising a strike. They're saying they don't want a strike. But look, it goes back to the heart of left-wing thinking. where is the magic money tree? There is nobody who wouldn't want to pay nurses more. Let's get that out of the way. Secondly, the shortages of nurses in the NHS is not just about pay. It could be largely about pay, I accept that, but it's not only about pay. It's about where we get nurses from, how do we bring them through, who pays for their training. It's much more complicated than is being suggested. But for me, there's three principles. Yes, nurses should be able to strike, but only when the provision is there not to cause damage to patients. I would suggest the nurses are looking at that as it is now. I think there should be some kind of binding arbitration so they can resolve these issues without having to strike. But all pay in the public sector should be looking at what's happening in the private sector. Because, again, the private sector is not bankers. It's people who work in a chippy. It's people who are cleaners. It's people who are brickies. It's a broad spectrum of people.
But
and you're asking them to pay more than they can afford.
No, but you do have to train properly to be a nurse. And this is why the problem is quite complex, because if you're a nurse, you've trained, you've paid for this training, you have a qualification, you're more skilled than someone that works in a chippy, so therefore I do think they should be paid more. But this is much more long-term than just demanding a 15% pay rise.
Yeah, I agree.
It's about perhaps making it simpler and cheaper for people to actually train to become nurses. So therefore, the price that they're paying to become a nurse isn't that substantial compared to what they're actually being paid and the working conditions. So I agree that I want them to be paid more, but right now, if I'm in government right now, logically, just announcing
in terms of the working conditions, nurses are, on the whole, still charged to park in the hospital they work at. That could be taken away tomorrow.
Well, I think we can all agree that the lots of nurses should be improved because they have been heroic in the course of the pandemic. But one thing that would have helped, any voices that called for those appalling 3 national lockdowns, which smashed our economy against a brick wall and saw borrowing of £500 billion, should hang their heads in shame, because if we hadn't done that, if we'd preserved our economy, if we hadn't paid healthy people to stay at home and close once viable businesses, we would have endless billions with which to look after our nurses. Coming up, was the world a safer place during Donald Trump's time in office? Would we be better off now if Trump had won the last election? Well, social media sensation and music star Zubi weighs in at 10:45. But first, would it be a mistake for Liz Truss to raise the retirement age? Has the dream of early retirement come to an end? We'll discuss retirement with my panel next.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Coming up, was America and the world safer and more secure under President Donald Trump? Plus, my nominations for the final Union Jackass and Greatest Britain of the Week very, very shortly indeed. But first, it's been trailed, and I'm delighted to say we've got the line going. He is one of the most successful authors of all time, having shifted almost 300 million copies around the world and landed 27 Sunday Times #1 bestsellers. Lord Geoffrey, 1980s set fifth instalment in the William Warwick series, features his good friend, the late Princess Diana, and sees the aforementioned detective uncover a plot that strikes at the heart of the country and the crown. But before he took over the literary world, Lord Geoffrey Archer was one of the country's most prominent politicians. Lord Archer, as the title suggests, is a working member of the House of Lords and a former deputy chairman of the Conservative Party under Margaret Thatcher. So he's seen the melodramas play out, not just in his books, but in real life as well. Lord Geoffrey Archer, welcome to GB News.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm sorry that we had trouble with the link.
No problem. Wonderful to have you, Lord Archer, and congratulations on the release of this absolute scorcher. It's called Next in Line. It focuses on the protection of the Princess Diana in the late 80s. It's the fifth instalment of the DCI William Warwick series. It mixes fiction with real events. Now, Diana was a friend of yours. Was it hard to bring her to life in one of your books?
Well, I'd waited 25 years and had the privilege of working with her on her charity work as an auctioneer. And over the years, got to know her very well indeed. And in fact, we went to her home and she came to ours and we wrote to each other. And towards the end, she telephoned regularly. So yes, I did get to know her. And the answer to your question is, I'm very pleased to say that two members of the family, much they enjoyed it. So, but I was a little nervous that one of the family might not have felt it was right, but I'm happy to say they've both enjoyed it.
You've spent time with Royal Protection Officers. Just how hard is that job to carry out? Because that's a very strong theme of the book, isn't it?
Very good point. Well, it was fascinating watching them. Of course, at the time when I worked with Princess Diana, I wasn't aware of them. But when 25 years later, I talked to Ken Worth, who'd been her personal protection officer, I learned the things they get up to that you just don't spot. Their eyes are roaming in every direction. And there's not just one of them, there's often four of them. You look very closely, as I do now when I see a member of the royal family entering a building, I see it on television. I search for those people who are actually there protecting them. Because their job, as Ken said to me, it only needs to go wrong once. You can go 364 days, everything goes perfectly, and then something goes wrong on one day, and that's the only thing people will ever remember. When I wrote at the beginning of the book, is this a true story? Did I take an incident which Princess Diana told me about, or did I make it up? The reader has to decide.
And that's why it's so compelling, because we know the central protagonist so well. You've sold almost 300 million books, Lord Archer, mostly pure fiction and great storytelling. What attracted you to this genre in which you now include real events?
Well, I suppose because I had 7 or 8 stories that I knew to be true, and then looked for some to invent as well, I suddenly realized when I got to the end of the book, half of it was true and half of it wasn't true, and the reader would have to decide. And in the case of the big incident at the end of the book, you really will have to decide if that happened. I think also, looking back, First Among Equals, certainly that had elements of real life in it. The Clifton Chronicles, I think It's not the first time I've done it. It's the first time I've done it because I've done it with Margaret Thatcher. But it's the first time the centre of the story has been someone everybody knows. Yes, I think you're right.
I'm ready for a very political book from you, because if you were to write a book about Liz Truss's tumultuous first few weeks in office, Lord Archer, it would surely be rejected by editors as far-fetched.
Oh, you could never get away with suggesting that Her Majesty the Queen appointed someone on a Tuesday. And when I looked at her, I thought, you'll live to 100. You'll outlive me. And 2 days later, Her Majesty was dead. If I present, you're quite right. If I had offered that to a publishing house, they'd have said, couldn't you put a year between it, Geoffrey? Couldn't you do this? They'd have had 100. No, you're quite right. It would have been absolutely laughed out of town, because true life, real life, is much stranger than fiction. And indeed, what's happened since, even stranger still.
Indeed. So I want to give my viewers and listeners details of your fantastic new bestseller. Before we go, you've had an incredible life, Lord Archer, with many adventures to come. And of course, you've had your highs and a couple of lows, including jail for perjury and near bankruptcy in the mid-70s. But you've prevailed over all of these challenges. What is the mentality that makes you bounce back so spectacularly?
Well, I hope that's just part of one's nature. I've been very lucky because the British public, indeed, all over the world, have been tremendously supportive. And I hope my charity work, I hope the other things have been part of it. But when it comes to the books themselves, yeah, I've been a very lucky guy. I've got a simple gift. I tell a story.
Well, you tell one like no one else, let's be honest, and those sales demonstrate that. I know you don't like killing off characters, especially DCI William Warwick, the star of this particular tome, but is Liz Truss finished, Lord Archer?
That's a very good question. She hasn't had a good start, but I think the party would be remarkably foolish to go through that entire process again. It's only years to the next general election, and battle on would be my attitude. But the party is so febrile at the moment, heaven knows what will happen. If you interviewed me in a fortnight's time, you'd be saying, do you believe that happened, Geoffrey? And I'd be saying, no, I hadn't worked that one out. I've never seen anything like it. Do you know, because we have 7 living prime ministers. And on the back benches, we have 2 prime ministers, 3 former deputy prime ministers, 4 foreign secretaries, 5 home secretaries, and 28 cabinet ministers. So it's no wonder it's in turmoil. How she's going to control that lot, I do not know.
Lord Geoffrey Archer, congratulations on the release of the book, which I know is going to deprive me of sleep for the next few days. It is called Next in Line. How do you protect the world's most famous woman? Praise for Geoffrey Archer. If there was a Nobel Prize for storytelling, Archer would win the Daily Telegraph. Geoffrey, lovely to speak to you. Hope we catch up again in the near future.
Yes, please.
Brilliant stuff. Well, lots more to come. My panel will nominate their Greatest Britain and Union Jackass of the day. But next, was America a safer place and the world? Were we better off when Donald Trump was president? We'll discuss that with social media sensation and music star Zubi.
Coming up on Dan Wootton Tonight, with Harry and Meghan reportedly now warring with their Netflix paymasters as well as the royal family, will the Sussexes soon have nowhere to turn? Royal biographer Tom Bower delivers his blistering verdict. Plus, can Kwasi Kwarteng recover and become the Chancellor Britain needs in these dark economic times? His friend of 25 years, top Daily Mail columnist Stephen Glover, gives his take. And there's opinion galore from Nigel Farage, Neil Oliver and my superstar panel. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Dan Wootton back on Monday. Don't forget, I'm back tomorrow, Saturday and Sunday for Mark Dolan tonight. Now, was Donald Trump right to say the war in Ukraine would never have happened if he'd still been president? Social media sensation Zubi explains why he agrees. And let's catch up with Zubi very shortly. But first, in fact, let's do it now. It's time for Uncancelled, where Britain's top commentators speak out on controversial issues without the fear of the cancel culture sweeping the rest of the media. This week, the brilliant Lawrence Fox, who's been stepping in for our own Nigel Farage, bagged an exclusive with Donald Trump, during which he made this bold statement about the Ukraine war. Take a listen.
So now we're 7 months into this war in Ukraine. What do you think? Is Putin done for? What's your take on it? And what would President Trump be doing today?
Well, I'd be taking accolades because it would have never been a war. Would have never happened. What's happened now is there are no winners. There can never be a winner in this.
Well, there you go. Social media sensation, rapper and regular GB News contributor Zubi agreed, though with some less favourable phrasing. He tweeted, "The truth is that the USA and the world in general were safer and more secure when Donald Trump was US president. Sometimes you need an a-hole to keep the other a-holes at bay." Zubi, you're no a-hole, so what do you mean by that?
Hey, how's it going? What I
Good
mean
to see you,
is
Zubi.
that being a president, being a world leader, especially of a country like the USA, is about more than just being a nice guy on the surface level. There are people around the world, there are countries who have dictators as leaders, who have people who are more authoritarian, who care less about being so-called nice or kind and tolerant in the way that we consider these things in the West. And people who are strong and powerful in that sense, even if they may be insecure, what they respect is strength from other people. So I think that Donald Trump, regardless of his flaws and some of the personality traits that people don't like, he was able to better handle people like Vladimir Putin, people like the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, and other leaders around the world. And I think regardless of what people may personally think about him character-wise, I think that led the world to be more safe and secure. You have to remember he brokered unprecedented deals in the Middle East. He met with the North Korean leader and was keeping things calm and at bay with him, and even with Putin himself as well. So I think on a foreign policy level, that he was a lot more competent and respected around the world more than the current president is. But I also think that domestically within the USA, objectively by many measures, the country was just doing better economically, financially, crime rates, things like that. Those all had better numbers under a Trump presidency.
Zubi, brilliant as ever. I wish we had longer. We know you had an early start to join us today. What a thrill to have you on the programme. And we'll speak for longer next week. Social media sensation. Follow him on Twitter. The guy's a legend, Zubi. He's also an international music star as well. It's time now for this. Yes, indeed. Time for my panel to quickly reveal their Greatest Britain and Union jackass. We've got Dominique Samuels, Sean Bailey and Amy Nickel. And Dominique, who has caught your eye this week for praise?
My honorary Greatest Britain is Elon Musk for his tweets about finding peace in Ukraine.
I agree. An important conversation. We need peace. We need that war to end. And he's been attacked for it. The world's gone mad. OK, Sean, your Greatest Britain.
My Greatest Britain is the Home Secretary, Savella Braverman, for her change in approach to how burglary is dealt with. She's made the police agree to send an officer to every burglary in the country, which is great news.
Amen to that. Amy?
My Greatest Britain nominee is Mike Pickering from M People, who said the appalling Conservatives, his quote, not mine, didn't ask permission to use Keep On Moving.
All right. Well, look, I'm going to go for... Who shall I go for? I'm going to go for Musk, because we want to see an end to that war. OK, and Union Jackass, just a few seconds. Dominique?
James O'Brien for his ridiculous comments that he made this week.
I'm not familiar with his work. How about Sean, your nomination?
Mine is Sadiq Khan for his handling of the ULEZ consultation.
OK, and last but not least, Amy.
Lee Anderson for his short temper.
Oh, poor old Lee. He's only human. I'll give it to Sadiq Khan. He could have it every week, frankly. Thank you so much for your company. I'm back for Mark Dolan tonight at 9 o'clock tomorrow. See you then.
Evening, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Friday offers some fairly typical autumnal fare. Bit of sunshine, a spell of heavy rain moving south and some gusty winds. Low pressure to the north, high pressure to the south, and in between plenty of isobars. The winds coming in from the west, and this weather front in particular bringing some wet weather tonight across parts of Scotland. That rain could be fairly heavy, some blustery conditions as well. That rain will push into Northern Ireland and southern Scotland by dawn. Bar the odd shower further south, much of England and Wales will be dry. Be some clear spells as well, but enough of a breeze to stop temperatures falling too far. A milder night than last night, double digits to start Friday for most urban areas. It will be quite a wet start for parts of southern Scotland and Northern Ireland, and this zone of rain sinking southwards, turning things fairly wet quite quickly across northern England, parts of North Wales, before heading into the Midlands and South Wales come the afternoon. Quite a narrow band of rain, so it shouldn't last too long, but it could be pretty intense, followed by a mixture of sunshine and blustery showers. Ahead of it, East Anglia in the southeast, mostly dry for much of the day. Quite warm again, 18 or 19. But the rain will push in here, so a lot of spray and surface water around on the roads for Friday evening's commute before that zips away. And then we're left with showers coming into northwest England, western Scotland, and a few for Northern Ireland. That's how we go into the weekend. And that's really how Saturday continues. 1 or 2 showers for northwest England. Certainly we'll see some showers for western Scotland, the north coast of Northern Ireland. But for many, Saturday's going to be dry and bright with some October sunshine, lifting the temperatures to fairly typical values for this time of year, low to